It's good to be with all of you, and thank you so much, Africa, for that introduction to Worldviews. I happen to be at a gathering of kind of cultural people with the African National Congress a couple of years ago, because we were involved in digitizing the ANC archive. And they had invited a number of cultural specialists to speak to them about how do we ensure social cohesion in South Africa. And during that meeting, I felt inspired to speak to the whole crowd, who were very eminent, and I shouldn't have opened my mouth at all, but I guess it's my prophetic nature coming through. And I just said, the problem that we face in South Africa, we tend to write as RACE, and that seems to be the thing that we look to as the source of all our issues in this nation. But we could equally be speaking about issues of unequal distribution of wealth and so on, social issues and how we deal with those, with housing and so on and so forth. Some of those we've been doing quite well on, others not so. But probably, and we might also speak about culture as being something that keeps us apart. And so all of these things are race, culture, unequal distribution of wealth and social problems of fatherlessness and so on and so forth. All of those things can be the source of a lack of social cohesion. But I said, probably though, one level that we're missing out here, which probably undergirds all the others, that is underneath all of the others and gets missed out, is called worldviews. And worldviews is something, as Africa has explained, of how we view the world, how we engage with the world, and that all of us come to reality with different presuppositions. And those presuppositions determine how we think about things and how we react to things and how we make sense of our reality and how we try and solve our issues. And and so that's how I was able to come to, and then I was speaking about various different types of worldviews, and that really emerged out of some work that I had done some years prior to that with our own church in Pietermaritzburg, a church called Grace Generation at that stage. And Grace Generation was a very multicultural church, but also very multi-economic group, so quite diverse. And so had a great privilege of being able to interact with a number of people from different backgrounds and start to workshop. What are the kind of things in our country? What are the kind of worldviews in our country that we live alongside as people, and particularly here in KZN? And out of that kind of exploration over a number of months with a group of people who were very helpful, we emerged with 8 worldviews that, and maybe I can share my screen. Am I able to do that? You'd have to help me. And those 8 worldviews are really a traditional worldview. Hopefully you can see my screen. And we identified out of that process 8 different worldviews that we live alongside in KZN. One is the traditional worldview, which, the ancestors and how do we ensure harmony with our neighbors, our ancestors, and so on and so forth. Post-colonial worldview, which I'll speak into a little bit, ancient worldview, which impacts us nowadays in ways we often don't know, a modern worldview, postmodern worldview, religious worldview, and Eastern worldview, and then the last one we call the Trinitarian worldview, and for quite specific reasons. So in all of these worldviews, we could be asking major questions about reality. So for instance, we could be asking, so where did the world come from? And each of those worldviews are going to say something different. So according to my professor of religious studies at UCT, Gabriel Setloane, if I ask what is the creation myth of traditional worldview, he would say, well, among the Sotho-Tswana, people emerged from a hole in the ground with their cattle as a community. And he would say among the Nguni peoples, actually it's out of a bed of reeds. Again, as a community, not as individuals, as a community with their cattle, their wealth, and those obviously the creation myth speaks to some concepts of how we see ourselves. And so certainly as we see in traditional worldview here in Africa, and by the way, traditional worldviews are all over the world, Europe, North America, South America, all over the world, you see some fairly common threads in those traditional worldviews. But we all know the phrase, Gumtu Gabanya Bantu. People are people because of other people. So our being is in communion together with one another. If we had to maybe contrast that with the modern worldview, which is really why it is the worldview that undergirded colonialism and the Western world expansion into other parts of the world. What's the creation myth there? Well, it used to be that the world was eternal, but we sort of emerged by evolution. More recently, in the last 50 years, science has determined actually there was a start. There was a beginning, and we call that the Big Bang. And so the Big Bang and evolution are the explanation for how we came into being and where we are. And obviously the clear implications of that is individualism and the survival of the fittest. It's the fittest to survive, and they need to do so by getting into the strongest position. And obviously we can see the outcome of that in colonialism and in apartheid and all sorts of outcomes. And Hitler and Stalin are very much modernists who played out the script of modernity. If I have to then look at, say, a religious worldview, how did the world come into being? Well, we know God created the world, whether this is Islam or religious Christianity or Judaism. God created the world, and he is the lawgiver. And so really we've got to respond to God as the lawgiver. And so really, and so that determines, we're created in the image of God. It determines how we view people and reality. Let me think about postmodernity. Postmodernity, how the world is created, is actually borrowed from two sources. One is from modernity with the evolution narrative, Big Bang evolution narrative, but also that's not enough for our souls, is what postmodernity is saying. And so we tend to borrow from the East. I don't know if any of you have seen that wonderful movie, Eat, Pray, Love. And it's a movie of a postmodern lady and how she discovers herself. And so really asking the big question of where the world comes from kind of gives us some outcomes, and each of these will be saying different things. We might also ask the question, so what is wrong with the world? And again, each of these worldviews will be saying something different about what's wrong with the world. If I started with the Eastern worldview, Eastern worldviews would say that what's wrong with the world is differentiation. In other words, seeing myself as different from all that is. And actually, the path to nirvana is the path to the self-actualization, or the realization that we are all one with everything that is. And so we're in harmony with all that is. And so we get subsumed into all that is, because obviously we know the Eastern worldview is a pantheistic worldview. And so God, there is no transcendence. There's no God outside of reality. God is all that is, and we are part of God, and we've just got to realize it. And that's part of the thing. If we asked what's wrong with the world in post-colonial, so post-colonial is the foundational worldview to many of the current movements that we're seeing. Black Lives Matter, roads must fall, fees must fall. Many of the worldviews that we are actually seeing at the moment emerging can be kind of summarized in a post-colonial worldview, which is really a reaction, like both post-colonial and postmodern are a reaction to the modern. And so the modern worldview, with its survival of the fittest, created such huge problems in the world. As we know, more than 100 million people killed in the 20th century at the hands of ideologies of the modern worldview. Both postmodern and post-colonial are a reaction to the modern. Postmodern is actually a Western reaction. It's the embarrassed young people, embarrassed of their heritage in the modern worldview, embarrassed at what we did in colonialism and how we abused the world, at how we're raping the planet for our own uses, for industry and so on, that emerged out of the modern worldview. So postmodern is like an embarrassed reaction by the West to the modern, whereas post-colonial is a same reaction, but against the West, against the modern, by those who were subjugated by modernity, by the colonial. And so post-colonial is a reaction against that. And so if we ask what's wrong with the world in post-colonial, post-colonials are saying what's wrong with the world is injustice and abuse. And we've got to throw off the yoke of injustice, and we've got to make things right. And obviously, if I had to ask, so what's wrong with the world in post-modernity? Postmodern worldview says what's wrong with the world is dogma, is absolutes, because modernity had absolutes, modernity had science, modernity had facts. So if you look at the start of Charles Dickens' wonderful novel, Hard Times, there's a teacher who's saying, teach the young men facts, sir. Everything is facts, because facts is truth, you see. And so truth is associated with facts. And so that there's a real suspicion of science now, and a suspicion of absolutes, a suspicion of ideologies, a suspicion of dogma in the postmodern worldview. So what's wrong with the world? Dogma. If you claim absolutes, all you're doing is claiming power over others, because truth is just a power play. And so postmodern worldview really is looking for alternative answers than what the modern will bring, and is often looking to the East for those answers, and also to traditional cultures. Anything that is not of its Western heritage. It's looking particularly Christianity. So if we had to ask what's wrong with the world in the religious worldview would say, well, what's wrong with the world is disobedience and unbelief. So wrong belief and wrong action. That's what's wrong with the world, which we call sin. If I had to contrast that with the Trinitarian worldview and asking what's wrong with the world, we would also say in the Trinitarian worldview, the problem is sin, but the content of sin is different. The content of sin is ultimately a broken relationship with the living God, which plays out in wrong belief and wrong action. But it's not primarily wrong belief and wrong action, it's a broken relationship. And so, so each of these worldviews is answering the questions differently. If I had to just go very quickly into the ancient worldview, the foundational myth of the ancient worldview is the myth of the Titans, where the Titans, the evil Titans, caught the goddess Dionysius, killed her and ate her. And God Zeus, he was so angry, he came and cut the Titans open, and out of their belly emerged human beings with an evil body and the spark of God in them. And so we see in the ancient worldviews this view that physicality is evil and spirit is good. And our role as human beings is to try and escape the evil body and get back to the world of pure spirit. And that pervades the ancient world in every way. And you've heard of Gnosticism, no doubt. Gnosticism was an attempt to try and deal with that. And the ancient Greeks were very much dealing with that as the primary issue. And that plays out, obviously, in the ancient Greek in two main movements: the hedonists, who basically said, well, the body is evil, therefore the body doesn't matter, therefore what we do with the body has no consequence, therefore we can give in to all the desires of the body. And the Stoics, on the other hand, who said, actually, no, we've got to push down the desires of the body, and we've got to actually live disciplined lives. And we've got to live primarily in a life of rationality, and put down these sort of these warring desires in the body. And so we see there, actually, in the writings of Paul, we see the very things in the early Corinthian church of churches struggling with these very things of Stoics and hedonists, people who are sleeping around with their mother-in-law, and then on the other hand being very religious and denying the body and so on and so forth, those same things. And that carries through into the cultural wars of this day. In America, the Democrats and the Republicans represent two views of freedom, which comes from the ancient world. And freedom for the Democrats is the freedom to do whatever I want to do, as long as it benefits the collective. And for the Republicans, freedom is the freedom to do what I want to do economically, but I must be putting down the desires of the flesh. And so, all of these worldviews come at reality in a different way, and all of them have different answers. And so as we were exploring this and helping people to understand, we realized that actually all of us are a mix of worldviews. All of us come to reality with a mix of worldviews. None of us are purely one or the other. So for instance, when we deal with health issues, if you are from a more westernized worldview, you would tend to go to the doctor first. Or maybe if you're really Christian, you might get prayer first and then go to the doctor. If you are from a traditional background, you might go first to the Sangoma or the Nyanga, and then you might get prayer. Or maybe if you're really Christian, you get prayer first, and then you go to the Sangoma and the Nyanga, and then only then you might end up going to the hospital at the end of the day. So all of us have different worldviews. All of us have a mix of worldviews. None of us are pure in our worldview, and probably that's the case until we are in heaven. Also, all of the worldviews we noticed actually have something that they long for that is good. So every worldview, though you might say this is, this worldview is wrong and it's going to be damaging to people, actually at the heart of it, everyone longs for something good. So you see, and this is key when you're trying to reach people. And that's really where I come from. I'm an evangelist. I want to reach people. I want to meet them where they're at and lead them through to truth. And so we need to find what is the grain, where is God's hand in this thing? And so really, if you were saying, okay, the traditional worldview, what is the desire? What's the longing in the traditional worldview that is at the heart of the traditional worldview? And you would say, actually, the longing is for harmony. The longing is to have harmony in community. So that people would speak about harmony with their neighbors, harmony with their ancestors, harmony with creation. Harmony is the longing in traditional worldview. In post-colonial worldview, the longing is for justice and for retribution or restitution. Those are good longings. In the ancient worldview, actually, the longing is for spirituality. In the modern worldview, the longing is for knowledge and education. Postmodern worldview, well, the longing in the postmodern worldview is that we would stop damaging everything and raping everything, and that we would somehow be able to live in some sort of collective where we're for one another. Of course, we know the outcome of that has not been the reality, but there is a heart there that one can draw on, and it's a heart for making right. And religious worldview, well, the longing is that we would be righteous, that we would be righteous before God. We have good standing before God. Obviously, that's mostly in our own effort, which has problems. The Eastern worldview, the longing is for union, which is a very good spiritual longing, union with God. And the mystics in the Christian tradition are good in helping us towards that longing, because ultimately that is what we want, is union with God, ultimately, as we are included in his family, in the Trinity. And obviously in the Trinitarian worldview, our longing is for a restored relationship where we're not subsumed into God, but we are included in the divine love and life of the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so really what we do this as workshops with young people and older people, but in Scripture Union, we've been trying to do some of these with workshops with school pupils, trying to get them to identify what are the influences on their lives. And at the end of the day, we're saying, actually, there are worldviews some worldviews are more successful than others at achieving certain outcomes. And And so if you wanted a real harmony, and you wanted true hospitality, you probably at the end of the day, the Trinitarian worldview is the only one that says all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So we're all in the same boat. Whereas if any of these others, I am going to be kinder to those who have common ancestry in this one. I am going to be kinder in this one to those who are also suffering from injustice than to those who are causing the injustice in this one. Forget about ancient. In modern, I'm going to be kinder to those who are more intelligent, more educated, more believing in science and technology alongside me. Here, I'm going to be kinder to those who are part of a group that is not abusive and hasn't got the wrong identity politics. Here, I'm going to be kinder to those who believe the right stuff and do the right stuff. Here, I'm going to be kinder to those who are following the path to nirvana. Here, I'm kind to all because all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And it's the kindness of God that changes us, not our own kindness. And He's the agent for our transformation, not ourselves, not our own belief systems, not our own ability to do things. It's Him and His amazing, powerful Holy Spirit that's poured out into our hearts in Jesus Christ. And so, yeah, we are pointing out to people, you can change worldviews. You can leave some worldviews and take on other worldviews. And when you understand these various worldviews, it becomes more and more apparent which worldview is so wonderful. It is actually really revolutionary. What's the real revolutionary worldview? Well, it is the Trinitarian worldview. Thanks. I think I've probably said more than enough.